Yelling with everyone will be starting in just a couple of minutes.
Yelling with everyone will be starting in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Yelling with everyone will be starting in just another minute. Thank you.
Yalimadith, everyone. We hope you're doing well and safe during this time. Welcome and thank you for joining with us for Module 5 of Essay Strategies for your college application with Apollo 12, where we'll provide some tips and tricks as you craft your personal statement and your personal narrative during your college application. So my name is Rahina Malik, and I'm a recent graduate from Duke University, where I studied neuroscience and psychology, and I'm currently based in Atlanta. And our wonderful presenter is Rahim Punja, who's going to go ahead and introduce himself, and I'll hand it off to him.
Thank you so much, Rahina. Yeah, hello everyone. It's great to be here with all of you. Hope everyone is staying safe and healthy. I'm coming to you from Chicago, Illinois. Professionally, I run strategy for a food science company called Tate & Lyle, which has its North American headquarters here in the Chicagoland area. And I'm hoping to spend the evening with you and share with you some of share perspectives and some of my experience from serving on the admissions committee at the University of Pennsylvania. Before we dive into the content, we'd like to just pose a couple of questions so we get a sense of who's joining here. So if we can queue up the first polling question, we'd like to know who is with you on this call. So if you're joining by yourself, if you're joining with a parent or guardian or multiple parents and guardians, if there are other family members here with you. So I'll pause my screen and then the question should pop up on your end. All right. So the next question we have is just to get a sense of the distribution of grades that we have represented here. So for those of you who will be entering into your 12th grade year, you can mark that, but we'd like to know what grade you are in if there is a student in the room with you, what grade the student is in that's joining us here today. All right, and then the last question we have here is just to ask whether you already have an essay draft or you have yet to start one. Either situation is okay, either answer is okay. We just want to get a sense of where you are in the process and in the journey so that we can make sure that we cater to your needs and your interests. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for participating in that quick poll. It'll give us a very clear sense of how we want to structure and spend the rest of our time. All right, so before we jump into some of the materials here, we'll start with a quote from Maulana Haji Imam. And this is actually from the time of the Golden Jubilee when Maulana Haji Imam was stateside and had the opportunity to present at the Peterson Lecture. So I'll read this off to you. If you're near a screen, you can follow along. Quote, "You can have nothing in your pocket and only the clothes and the shoes you wear. But if you have a well-educated mind, you will be able to seize the opportunities life offers you and start all over again," end quote. Now you'll notice that the date here, as we mentioned, is from the Golden Jubilee period. So it's over 12 years old. And just like many of the other speeches and firmans of Haji Imam, this one too is quite appropriate for the current situation and the current climate that we're in we're hearing and continuing to learn about a number of individuals who are having to restart their careers and sort of relaunch their professional endeavors after experiencing some setbacks in the current climate, both here in the United States, but also abroad. And so this quote felt really sort of appropriate for the current situation, and hopefully it sort of resonates with you and it inspires you to drive for the desired outcomes that you might have. So we'll talk about kind of what we'll cover today, and this is really sort of going to be a deep dive into essay specific strategies. So we've spent the last few modules sort of building up to this. We've talked to you about kind of assessing and kind of taking inventory of your extracurriculars, building a criteria for schools that you might consider, building a list of schools, thinking about how you sort of prepare for some of the components of your application, whether that be the ACT or SATs, et cetera, even the types of applications that you might consider. So we're at the point now where we are getting into the essay strategy, and it looks like about a quarter of you have some version of a draft or are kind of working in sort of outline mode, and so are kind of on your way, but a number of you haven't yet started. So we'll be able to kind of provide guidance and share thoughts to both groups. In terms of the target audience, this is really directed towards students who are rising 12th graders who are in the midst of the college application process. If you are not a rising 12th grader, you're more than welcome to stick around and listen to the session, but just realize that we'll be talking about a lot of tactics and a lot of very specific tasks that are going to be relevant for those who are in the throes of the college application process. If you've already written a draft, that's perfectly fine. We'll talk about some strategies and some techniques that you can then use to apply back to the essay that you already have or the draft that you already have, and hopefully continue to strengthen it and evolve it over time. And as always, if there are questions, please do submit those to the chat box. We'll continue to monitor that during our discussion, and then we'll, inshallah, have some time at the end for questions as well. In terms of the agenda today, we've got quite a lot that we would hope to cover with you. Everything from how to brainstorm for an essay to how to kind of open and have a strong introduction. We'll talk a little bit about some of the effects of COVID-19 and some of the changes to this year's application process, and then just some overall guidelines and best practices. So let's go ahead and get started. If you think about the admissions committee at the various schools that you'll be applying to, you realize that the course of about half of the year is really spent by them reviewing and reading applications. We think about sort of early decision and early applications that come in at sort of around the October-November timeframe, and then you've got regular round deadlines in January, and then sort of decisions being released in April. And then the admissions committee is typically managing a wait list of some kind and sort of continuing to monitor and sort of review inputs that are coming in from those waitlisted candidates. And so they spend a good portion of the year just immersed in applications and sort of reviewing essays. And oftentimes, if you were to ever visit the home of an admissions committee officer, you'll see just kind of scattered all around their home, right, on their coffee table, on their nightstand, just stacks and stacks of applications that they're working through. And especially at a time like this, when all many of us are sheltering in place, the environment can be quite stressful, to say the least, for the reader. But your role and the opportunity that you have really is to convert and kind of to sort of make sure that you don't get lost in this stack or the stacks of applications that the reviewers are working through. So the opportunity you have really is to take the stack, or at least your application, turn it into something far more exciting for them to review, to read, and to sort of really be engaged with. And we'll talk today about how you can go about doing that. If you think about the qualitative aspects of your application, there are really 5 main components or 5 main areas where you have to build on top of the credentials, the transcripts, the test scores that you're submitting. So you've got your personal statement, or sort of the primary essay that you'll be writing. You've got supplemental essays that are required by schools that are more selective, in addition to short answers that they will also have sometimes as part of the supplemental submission. You'll have your extracurricular and activity list, and then finally your recommendation letters. And these are really the areas of your application where hopefully your story can start to come together, where you start to come to life and sort of really jump off the pages of the file or the folder that's containing all of your information. In many cases, everything that you've done during your freshman, sophomore, and junior years is now behind you. Those things are set, and so the opportunity you have really now to tell your story and to really kind of bring it all together are these components. We'll spend the bulk of the time today on the personal statement, or kind of the primary essay, but we've got module 6 next month where we'll go into the supplemental essays as well as the recommendation letters. Now, if you think about your essay, for those of you who previously have watched Super Bowl in the winter, you sometimes will fondly remember commercials that are part of that Super Bowl experience, right? And so the next day, the next week, the next month, you'll still be able to recall the 30-second commercial that really stood out, that had maybe a funny storyline or something that was sort of memorable enough for you to recall many months or even years later. Your goal and sort of the opportunity here with your essay is that it is your 30-second Super Bowl commercial. If you think about the thousands and thousands of applications that admissions committee officers are reviewing, they are spending an adequate amount of time on your application, but the essay is really where you can start to kind of ensure that you give them something quite memorable and something that they can recall many months or even many weeks down the line. So what are the admissions committee officers looking for? And there are a number of things that each of them, because they all come from different backgrounds and experiences, there are a number of things that they may be reviewing or sort of evaluating for. But we've tried to sort of summarize at least some of the most salient points or the most salient areas. So we've captured those here for you. The first is to understand if the college where this admissions committee is housed is able to offer you some of the things that you've declared in your application to be of interest, of passion, sort of hobbies that you might have, right? So if you talk about certain activities or extracurriculars or the type of major you may want to pursue, the admissions committee first and foremost is looking to ensure that they have something to meet your needs. Then the flip side, they're trying to understand whether you have something that you can offer to their community, to their student body. And that might be through some of your experiences, it might be through some of your academic pursuits, it might be based on sort of your identity and who you are and the perspectives that you bring. But the idea is that will an applicant enhance and really sort of inspire and inform the experience of others within the community? And it doesn't just have to be student experiences, it could be the experiences of faculty and staff as well. The third thing that that admissions committees will look for is whether an applicant brings sort of an individual voice, if they have a differentiated perspective. You can imagine within sort of a pool of thousands of applicants, it's quite possible that you'll have a number of captains of various sports teams, you'll have a number of student government leaders, you'll have a number of individuals who engage in sort of civic activities. But the idea is that despite some similarities or resemblance to other applicants, do you bring a perspective that's differentiated, that's unique, and that really sort of allows you to tell your story? And then finally, what admissions committees might think about is whether they could see themselves being your roommate, kind of hypothetically speaking, right? The idea is that is the applicant sort of exciting enough, engaging enough, sort of exploring a number of different topics and areas, and curious about the world, and sort of hopefully those elements come through in your essay and in your application. But collectively, these are things that you can keep in mind as you think about your essays, both your personal statement as well as some of the supplements that you might be writing as part of this process. Now, as I mentioned before, this is by no means intended to be complete or comprehensive, but just to give you a flavor of the type of audience that you're writing for. And this is why it's so important that when you write the essay for your college application, that it doesn't resemble how you might write for English class or history class or any other type of academic exercise. This is really writing for a very particular audience where you are trying to sort of champion and sort of advocate for yourself in a way that is persuasive and that is going to sort of yield certain outcomes. So keep that in mind. All right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of how we get to build our ideas and kind of capture our thoughts. And what we've done here is sort of structured it such that you have two different approaches. Of course, there are a number of methods that you can use and employ, but what we wanted to do is just narrow it down or sort of simplify it into two types of approaches, and we'll talk through each of these. So the first one is what we'll call a mind mapping exercise. So you start at the center with you, and then think about the themes or the sort of the major dimensions of you and your life, right? What are the things that sort of define who you are? What are some of the aspects of your background, of your upbringing, your personality, however you may want to interpret it? But think about the 2 to 5 things that you would say really kind of summarize kind of who you are as a person. And then for each of those, presumably you would have some kind of activities, extracurriculars, experiences, life experiences that would then try to support or reinforce that dimension of who you are. Additionally, you can think about, depending on the extracurriculars that you've had since freshman year all the way to now and even into your senior year, you can bring some of those activities that might be more recent, but hopefully you've got an extensive list or sort of at least a reasonable list of experiences and activities that you can use to start to map this out. And then as you've reflected on this and you start to build it out and kind of draw out some nuances, you'll hopefully start to really kind of summarize this down into a couple of salient points, a couple of characteristics or attributes that you feel really represent who you are. And then following that, what you'll aim to do is put together a 1 to 2 sentence summary, which we'll call your narrative. And this narrative is very critical because this is a narrative then that the admissions committee officer is going to anchor on once he or she has sort of developed this from reading your application. Because then when they go into committee, when they're discussing the number of applicants that they have that they're evaluating, and they're thinking about, do they have somebody who's a captain of a particular team, or they have a student government leader, or they have somebody who's been involved in community service. They want to ensure that they're bringing that diversity. They're building a class, right? And so you want to be able to kind of really synthesize who you are into a sentence or 2 or 3 that will hopefully be kind of the key takeaway from your application. So we're talking about this conceptually, but let's look at an example just so you get a better sense of how this might look. And keep in mind that this is not something that you'll do in a matter of an evening or an afternoon, right? This might take several days for you to kind of think about and reflect upon until you get to something that you feel very comfortable with. So let's look at an example. We have Ziana here, and Ziana really enjoys working with children. She has volunteered through Camp Mosaic for several summers, including the current summer where she's volunteering in a virtual capacity. She is a student teacher through REC, and for the last several years, she's been babysitting a couple of children in her neighborhood for about 10 hours a week, consistently year after year. So she's built a pretty strong relationship with a few of the families that she babysits for, and has kind of really sort of gained the trust and sort of the kind of comforts of the children that are in those families. Ziana also really enjoys painting. She's quite artistic, and so a couple of things that she's been involved with from this aspect is that through iServe, she helped lead the design of a mural that they were using to for a neighborhood beautification project that they engaged in last summer. She's spent the time during shelter in place producing a number of pieces of art, and because she is so sort of involved in this activity or these kinds of activities, she's actually been saving up for the last several months in order to upgrade some of her tools and supplies. Ziana actually came to the U.S. As a 7-year-old as part of an immigrant family, and so the last couple of years or even decade, she spent some time really kind of grappling between her identity and sort of who she is as an American and who she is as a South Asian. And so she's, where she has free time, she'll devote to researching sort of colonial rule in India, where her family was, and really trying to understand the impact that sort of era had on her family's sort of trajectory. And then, sort of related to that, she spent a number of weeks kind of perfecting a recipe in the kitchen and really sort of toiling with different sort of ingredients and formulations, and then kind of use that product, that end product, to be able to raise money for a local charity. So, this is sort of Ziana. This is sort of the mind map that she sort of was able to develop. And a couple of things I'd like to call out here. So when we think about the key themes, we start to see that Ziana is a very devoted person. She's someone who is committed and has spent kind of a sort of a period of time in some of these activities. She hasn't really bounced around, but has really kind of immersed herself, whether it be babysitting, whether it be some of her artistic work, or even some of the kind of recipe refinement that she did, right? It wasn't kind of a half-hearted exercise, but it was something that she really wanted to devote and sort of spend time with. She's also quite ambitious, and we get this sense from the participation in some of the regional competitions, her kind of thought leadership when it came time to this community service activity, where she was able to be the lead designer for the mural, and sort of overall really getting a sense for her passions and her interests. And then the overall narrative, kind of the one or two sentence summary that we, as admissions committee members, we might take away from Ziana's profile is that, Ziana is a driven and committed first generation American, building a broader identity through culture, service, and the arts. So, Ziana is not somebody who has, 6 different leadership appointments, right? In fact, a lot of her sort of leadership training has come through informal means or experiences. She has a clear sense of who she is, and where she doesn't have a sense of who she is, i.e., kind of some of the struggles she's had in terms of defining her own identity, she's devoted the time to really sort of start to understand and appreciate those aspects of her background. And so these themes will, inshallah, start to come through quite evidently as part of her application, but more so as part of her essay. Now, if you're in the situation where you already have a draft of your essay, you might say, do I need to go back and do this? It's really up to you. If you feel like this exercise will help sort of enlighten kind of the way you approach your essay, you may start to tease out certain additional elements that you may not have incorporated anywhere in your application even. It may be worth taking a couple of days at least to sort of think about whether you can complete this exercise, and hopefully it'll illuminate some thoughts that maybe you previously didn't consider. So this is the first approach, which we'll call sort of a mind mapping exercise, really to kind of get a sense of how you want to tell your story and how you want to articulate who you are to the admissions committee readers. The second approach is a bit more simplified. So the first approach, far more visual for those who may kind of benefit from that kind of a sort of a format. The second approach is a bit more structured, but definitely more simplified. And the idea is that you take the activities in your background, the extracurriculars that you've participated in, or other aspects of who you are, and for each of those, you try to answer these 3 key questions. And those questions are: what impact did I have in this particular activity or extracurricular? What did I learn or take away from this experience? And how has this particular experience shaped who I am as a person? In other words, if I did not have this experience, how would I be so much different as an individual or as a person than compared to now having this experience as part of my background? So let's walk through an example here as well, just so you get a sense of how this starts to play out. The one thing that we'd like to highlight for you is making sure that you sort of force yourself to get to the second and third questions is going to be quite critical. And the reason for that is these are the kind of questions, or hopefully the responses to these questions, are where you will be able to build a very deep connection and sort of a deep sort of personal relationship with the reader. Now, it's difficult to do that sort of in theory, but the idea being, just as we saw with Ziana, kind of getting so many different aspects of who she is and really appreciating her personality and her character. The second and third questions here will get you to a level of introspection and reflection where hopefully some of those same kind of thoughts and ideas might start to come through. So let's look at it at an example. We have Yusuf, who is a Boy Scout, and Yusuf's troop, Boy Scout troop, was involved in community service activities where they would visit a soup kitchen on a monthly basis. And for a couple of months, they would go month after month, serving food to the local community members, and sort of, really sort of interacting with them to that extent. And after a few months, Yusuf realized that this was not a satisfying experience. It was not sort of inspiring or kind of uplifting for him. And he felt that it wasn't also beneficial for those vulnerable members of the community who were coming to the soup kitchen. And so he put a proposal together for his troop leaders to try to figure out if he could help redesign the program or the service activity. And so the idea was that instead of just serving food to these community members, they would actually spend time with the community members afterwards to hear their stories, to understand really kind of what experiences they had that led them to that situation, and then maybe even to kind of just be sort of a shoulder to lean on, or sort of an additional sort of a resource or support that these members of the community could look to. And in doing so, it really sort of, the proposal was accepted, and sort of as this new version or kind of new format of the service activity was instituted, it started to really kind of inspire not only those of members of the Boy Scout troop, but also the members of the community that were sort of the beneficiaries of this program. So we got to see kind of, Yusuf going from being frustrated and very upset all the way to kind of having a very positive and sort of meaningful experience from this activity. So then if we think about these three key questions, how might we answer them based on this particular experience that, or this sort of narrative that we just heard, right? So the impact that Yusuf had was, he would say that it was really something where he was able to help evolve the program. So it wasn't just sort of a simple or basic service activity, but it was one where they were starting to build relationships with those members of the community that were often overlooked. Yusuf took away from this experience the idea that leadership doesn't have to come only with a title or a particular appointment, but leadership really comes with ideas and the ability to kind of not only generate ideas, but then to sort of believe in your idea and to run with your idea, to sort of see them to fruition. And then this experience really sort of changed who Yusuf is as a person, because through the conversations and hearing the stories about the single parent who who's raising multiple children, trying to make ends meet, and sort of just dealing with a tremendous number of hardships, Yusuf started to realize this sort of this level of empathy that he didn't have before. Even kind of being involved in community service through other activities and sort of other organizations, starting to kind of hear some of the stories and getting sort of that firsthand glimpse of the suffering that another individual was experiencing really gave him quite a different perspective, and thereby giving him a greater sense of empathy. So those would be kind of the three ways, or kind of the answers to these three key questions. And you can see that if we had just stopped with the impact that Yusuf had, we would not have gotten to sort of the depths of appreciating Yusuf's maturity, his leadership, and his ability to really sort of become a much stronger and even wiser person over the course of this activity. So if this is an approach that you sort of prefer, or that seems to resonate with you, the thought would be that start with sort of the full list of extracurriculars that you have, any academic activities or opportunities that you've been involved with, any hobbies or interests, aspects of your personality or your character, right? Whatever you feel are the elements of who you are or the experiences that you've had, and set up a very simple table like the one that you see here. And then for each of the activities that you've laid out or that you've enumerated, try to answer the three key questions that we talked about. So what was the impact that you had? What did you learn from that particular experience? And then how did that experience shape you, or sort of change who you are as a person? And it'll be difficult. It'll be difficult to answer the second question differently than how you might answer the third question. But the idea is that if you can sort of devote the time, devote some of the mind share to do so, hopefully you'll start to see maybe one activity or a couple of activities where you are getting to that depth of reflection and realization. And those could be the activities then, or the activity that you then feature as part of your personal statement. So I'll put a pin into this idea. We'll come back to sort of this thought, but wanted to just make sure that, you know, as you think about these key questions, you want to apply them to the different experiences that you've had, so that you can start to frame out what it is that you want to talk about as part of your personal statement or your primary essay. Pravina, any thoughts you would like to add here, or any perspectives?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would echo what Raheem said about finding an approach that works best for you for your reflection, whether that's on your activities and hobbies, things that really matter to you and that you're passionate about, on your family responsibilities and backgrounds, and really try and get organized. So actually from Module 4, I'm linking in the chat a copy of the extracurricular spreadsheet artifact that we went over. And you can use this for organizing your extracurricular activities. I would say just a couple of tips before we kind of dig in deep is really try and internally reflect on your background, your experiences, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable when you're like even writing it down on paper, right? Like if you have family responsibilities, or if you have a hobby that maybe is kind of strange, but you're really passionate about it, write it down and then look back on this extracurricular spreadsheet and think about, okay, what was, like Raheem mentioned, what was important for me? What impact did this have? And what did I learn from this? And what am I going to take from this activity that I could potentially craft my essay into a story with? So I think this idea of having like using these organization methods and reflecting very deeply and critically about your essay, and then kind of shaping that into a narrative or a story without having it be way too overwhelming is something that I did while I went through the college application process. But we'll dig in deeper into that as well.
Thank you, Rena. And that's a good point that you bring up. You know, sometimes we overlook the fact that we have to work a part-time job to support our family, but that counts as an activity, right? If you're responsible for helping take care of siblings, or maybe a family member who's ill, you know, if there are other things that you have to do that sit outside of the traditional definition of an extracurricular, you can include those as part of this as well. I mean, there's been some fascinating essays that we have read, which, you know, don't really center on a key club or a, you know, kind of a karate black belt experience. I mean, it could be something as very simple as and sort of an essay that I fondly sort of enjoy reading when it was first released, is sort of an essay of a young woman who talked about her going to the Costco with her father, who was actually shopping for their small business there. And sort of, you know, through that sort of journey and that essay, we learned so much about that individual, and really kind of the different dimensions of who she is. So yeah, it's a great point, Rahina. I mean, even for some students, you know, they don't realize that REC can be considered an extracurricular as well. So really anything and everything that you do outside of the classroom, that you do consistently and intentionally, you can capture as part of this table.
Yeah, definitely. And Raheem, before we move on to the next slide,
Sure.
would you be able to just make a quick clarification for some members of the audience who are asking about the difference between supplemental essays and Common App essays and short answers?
Yeah.
Just so people have an idea of what we're focusing on today.
Yeah, absolutely. So the personal statement, or what we're referring to as a personal statement, is typically kind of the primary essay that is part of your application. So if you are considering using the Common App, then it's the one essay that you have to write for Common App. In the case of schools that are more selective, that might be harder to get accepted into, they may require additional essays for you to complete. And so what those are sort of referred to as are supplemental essays. So they're not required if you're not applying to those schools. If you're applying only to schools that are kind of accepting the Common App essay, then that's that would satisfy the requirement. But in many cases, if you are applying to schools that are sort of more selective, you will have to submit additional essays. Maybe it's one, maybe it's three, just depending on the number of additional prompts that they have. With that, some schools will also have some short answers. So they may ask you, list out all the books that you've read for pleasure during your high school experience, right? Or talk about the neighborhood in which you grew up. So it might be 50 words or 100 words. It might even be 20 characters, right? So the short answer is just referring to not full essays that you would include as part of your supplemental form, but just some short answers that would also help provide a perspective of who you are as a person.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So everything that we're talking about here, just to kind of tie it back to that question, everything we're talking about here, you'll hopefully be able to use as part of your Common App essay, if that's the form that you're using, or the supplementals. In cases where you might have a school-specific application for a school that might not be on the Common App, they may have 2 or 3 essay prompts. So we'll kind of lump those as together as being sort of the Common App and the supplements, or the equivalent of those. But everything that we're talking about here should be sort of information or kind of content that you can then use either for your Common App, your short answers, your supplements, or any other parts of the application that you might be completing. What we will do, though, kind of for the remainder of this discussion, is we'll kind of double click into the primary essay or your personal statement, just so that we can kind of keep a bit more of a focus on that piece of the application. And so when it comes to opening your personal statement, kind of the introduction that you might use, there are a number of different strategies and techniques. In fact, if you were to Google kind of Common App essay intros, you'll find a variety of ways that people have sort of used, or kind of ways they've approached how they might write their introduction. A couple that we've just summarized for you here. The first one is a zoom in, zoom out, or what we're calling a zoom in, zoom out. This is not a scientific term or an industry term by any means, but it's the easiest way to kind of capture what we're trying to suggest. And the idea with the zoom in, zoom out is that you put the reader into the environment of the story that you're attempting to tell. You try to cater to their senses. You try to give them sort of an immersive experience of a particular situation or a journey, a part of a journey that you undertook in order to kind of get you to where you are today. The structured approach is less sort of creative. It's a bit more direct. It's a bit more kind of methodical, intentional even. But it starts to kind of reveal some of the different, again, sort of dimensions of the applicant. A reflection piece is exactly that. It's sort of an opportunity for one to really kind of share different thoughts, ideas, curiosities, things that keep them up at night. There was an essay written by a really great essay written by an applicant, where she basically used the essay to summarize all the thoughts that run through her head when she's taking a shower every morning before school. And through that essay, we got to appreciate all of the demands on her time, all of the things that she was juggling both within school and outside of school, the way she was sort of prioritizing her efforts and energy and sort of free time, and really kind of getting a sense of how she sort of was able to articulate something so mundane as taking a shower, but doing so in such a creative way that it served as sort of a reflection for how she wanted to tell her story. And then the declaration sort of item here is really just sort of structuring your essay in a way that you say something quite profound, even maybe provocative, and then you use the rest of the essay to try to support or explain that point of view. But like we said, there are sort of no there is no right approach or right answer. We've heard of stories where, or even seen essays of a student who was interested in becoming a computer science major, and so he embedded as part of his essay, a series of ones and zeros, which are quite common and sort of central to the kind of computer science domain. We sort of have seen other essays of students who took stand-up and improv classes, and they tried to interject some parts of their routine into their essay just to sort of make it a bit more engaging as well. So any approach that you might consider is sort of worth pursuing, but we'd like to share just a couple of examples with you here to give you a sense of what else you might want to think about. So let's look at the zoom in, zoom out first. And this is going back to the example of Yusuf, who we just talked about, who helped kind of redesign the community service activity through his Boy Scout troop. So I'll read the example here, and hopefully it'll kind of start to make sense. Plop, plop, plop. For 2 hours, all we did was plop rice and beans onto the styrofoam plates of Houston's homeless. The smile that graced my face at the start of our shift was quickly replaced with a sadness of how I could never come to eat this food myself. But as the hours passed, the sadness was replaced by frustration of how this entire event lacked what I thought we were trying to do here. So you can see that this is a great setup because it's starting to cue up some of the things that he's going to get into about how he was frustrated with the service activity. He took time to redesign it, to propose it to his leaders, and then to ultimately bring that new experience to his troop, but then also to those community members. I'll give you another example here. This is about someone who was traveling overseas to a foreign country. I quickly scanned the room's perimeter for an exit sign, all the while dragging behind me the handle of a suitcase with one clicking wheel. If this was an emergency, I could follow the gentleman a few yards ahead of me, his stride revealing the confidence of a person who regularly passes through this arrival hall. So again, this person here, puts you right into the environment. You're at an airport. You can just imagine the clicking sound of a broken wheel on a suitcase, sort of following this individual. You can start to sense a little bit of panic that this person may have experienced, being in a foreign country. And this essay then will go on to talk about, kind of if you think about those three key questions, this essay goes to talk about how, coming back to the U.S. and really sort of appreciating the challenges that immigrants have to endure, especially when English is not their primary language, and how this individual went and sort of set up sort of tutoring classes on English for those immigrants who could benefit. And so, the impact that she had obviously was to sort of impart this ability to speak a language. What she learned from that experience is that the languages become quite critical when it's a way to share your ideas, your thoughts, your sadnesses, your frustrations, but also kind of a way for you to connect with others. And then kind of how she changed as a person as part of this story was that she talked about sort of the sense of humility that overcame her, being primarily in the U.S. for most of her life and never having traveled to a foreign land. She realized that she always kind of thought or had sort of the sense of superiority, and really kind of being faced with the challenges of not speaking the local language where she was traveling gave her quite a dose of humility that she very much appreciated. So another example of a zoom in, zoom out. Where is everyone, and how much money do I need? I should have answers to the questions asked by Tom, an eager freshman who registered after seeing my flyer for the Stock Club's inaugural meeting. He and two other people waited impatiently for me to get started, but there were dozens of empty chairs that I thought should have been filled. After all, learning to navigate the market is a first step in appreciating capital structures in society. Now, the questions came from my own head. Should I have used more currency icons on the flyer? Why are people shorting this new club? And what would Warren Buffett do? So I won't read the rest of this, but you start to get a sense of kind of comic relief. This essay will then kind of tee up this failure or kind of setback that this individual experienced when he was trying to launch a new club at his school. And so again, you start to get a view or a visual, at least, of what this room looks like, the empty chairs, maybe some sweat beads forming on this applicant's forehead as he was, beginning to get nervous about how he might, deal with this current situation. Let's go to an example of a structured approach. And again, if you recall, this is one that has less sort of flowery language, less of a creative opening, but still gets to some of the insights and some of the takeaways that are important to help build that sort of one sentence narrative. As an intern at a construction engineering firm this past summer, I learned firsthand about the challenges of building a 20-story apartment building. Not just the structural or mechanical challenges, but also the intricate ways in which groups of people interact to complete a project properly. While I am primarily interested in core structural and civil engineering subjects, I have learned that engineering needs to be approached in a holistic manner that incorporates economic, environmental, and interpersonal systems. And again, you can start to see how the rest of his essay might be structured, where he talks not just about sort of the technical aspects of his internship this past summer, but also about some of the more kind of emotional intelligence or kind of people related skills that he may have developed and that he's hoping to sort of bring into his college experience. So many of you might be thinking about the Common App as the application that you'll use. Some of you might be filling out school-specific applications. If you're in Texas, you have a very specific application you have to fill out. If you're looking to apply to the California schools, you've got the Cal application. So each school is very different if they're not on the college application, or excuse me, the Common App. But just for purposes of this discussion, to help demonstrate an idea, what we've done is just captured the 7 prompts that are part of the Common App essay. And we'll talk a little bit about how you might apply the same thinking if you are not using a Common App for submitting your applications. So these are the 7 prompts, and many of you might have already seen this. Some of you might be seeing this for the first time, but these prompts actually are now, I think, in their 3rd or 4th year. So the Common App organization has actually been using this for several years, and they feel that collectively these provide students with a number of different ways that they may want to tell their story and sort of help build this component of their application. So at a high level, I'll just kind of share with you or explain what each of these prompts is inviting you to do. The first one is asking students to talk about a part of the background or their interests or kind of talents that they feel are so important or kind of integral to their kind of existence that they want to sort of use this time to share that with the admissions committee. The second prompt asks the student to talk about a setback or failure or a time where they experienced a challenge of some sort. Why was it difficult and challenging, and then sort of how did the student effectively overcome that setback or that difficulty. The third prompt is asking the student to talk about a time when he or she challenged a belief or idea, maybe sort of bringing a contrary perspective or sort of helping to provide an alternative point of view, and in some ways maybe challenge the status quo. What was the outcome from that, and sort of how did that evolve as part of that experience? The fourth prompt asks the student to talk about a problem that they have already solved or a problem that they would like to solve. And you can imagine that this could include a number of different ways that one might structure it, everything from why they sort of committed to solving that problem or why they would like to commit to solving that problem, or even, kind of why, what they did sort of as part of the abilities or kind of the approach to solving that situation. A fifth prompt here asks the student to talk about sort of an accomplishment or an event that really sort of marked their personal growth as part of their journey. The sixth prompt is an opportunity for the student to talk about an experience or an activity where they lose all sense of time. Now you can imagine this could be an extracurricular, this could be a hobby, a passion, something that they do for leisure, but really kind of why that's so stimulating and exciting for them. That's something that they could explain. And then the last prompt, again, if the first 6 don't fit or don't seem to be appealing, then the last prompt is really sort of talk about any topic of your choice. Now, I went through these just very quickly so that you get a sense about of the different ways that you might write your essay, or you might kind of think about telling your story. But I'll kind of also we'll present a thought out there is what if you don't start with a prompt, and what if you start with your mind map or with the three key questions, and you figure out first what it is that you want to talk about. Did you have a very sort of unusual summer last summer where you had to spend time at a part-time job and kind of really learning some unusual skills and capabilities that you didn't expect? Did you lead your kind of sort of high school sports team to a regional or sort of a state competition, sort of what you learned there? Whatever it is that you want to talk about from your experience or your background, we would encourage you to start with that first. And then what you'll do is sort of in the case if you're submitting a Common App, is come back to these prompts and then figure out which prompt is best suited for your story or kind of the narrative that you want to tell. And it's quite unsettling, I'm sure. It's probably something that seems to be kind of sort of advice that's a bit atypical. But what we end up seeing is a lot of students will spend days and weeks really sort of grappling between prompts 2 and 3 or prompts 1 and 6, and really kind of losing time and losing cycles because they're trying to figure out which prompt will give them license to tell their story. But what our suggestion is that, is to sort of start with that story that you want to tell, and then come back and kind of figure out a way as to how you tell it. So in sort of the way we've done things before is that we'll share an example. And so we'll take Yusuf's story, since we're all familiar with that now, and kind of the journey that he went on with his service activity, and sort of show you how he could use any one of these prompts to be able to share the experience that he had. So some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that's so meaningful. He can talk about Boy Scouts as being such a significant part of his childhood or even sort of his teenage years, and then kind of segue into the story about the community service activity. He can frame his story using prompt 2 by talking about the original community service activity as being sort of a challenge or a setback, and then all the things that he did to help redesign it. And then obviously some of the things that he learned from that particular experience as well. If he were to use prompt 3, he can talk about a time when he actually challenged the status quo or challenged the idea of just going to a community soup kitchen and sort of just serving food and then coming back home, and sort of the desire to do more, to connect more with the people that they were looking to serve, right? So he can use prompt 3 there as well. Prompt 4, if Yusuf were to choose this, he can very easily frame his story as a problem that he solved, and some of the things that he did to be able to get to that outcome, right? And of course, if he solved the problem, which it sounds like he did, then framing that as an accomplishment with prompt 5 could also satisfy using that option. And then prompt 6, losing all track of time, you could see Yusuf telling the story of him talking with the single parent at the table after the food has been served, and hearing about that individual's story, hearing about the struggles, and hearing about kind of the uncertainty that this person is sort of dealing with on a daily basis. And in doing so, and hearing these stories, he loses all track of time. He loses all sense of other things that he may sort of be responsible of doing. And of course, if really none of those prompts are satisfying, kind of appealing to Yusuf, he can obviously pick prompt 7. And so hopefully this demonstrates to you that if you don't take anything else away from today, hopefully you'll remember to start with your story first, either by building a mind map or thinking about the 3 key questions for each of your activities, figuring out which of the pieces of your background are most compelling or most exciting that you want to share. And then, then what you do is you come back and you figure out how do you want to package your story, right? And these prompts are really a package that story for you. So switching gears a little bit, since we've talked about the Common App essay or the personal statement, if you're not using the Common App, we talked about the short answers, the recommendation letters, and the supplements. What we would ask you to do, regardless of which approach you'll decide to take, what we would ask you to do is, if you have a table like this set up, to list out all of the schools that you're considering applying to. And the reason for that is because we want you to make sure that your story doesn't become redundant or repetitive with any other aspect of your application. So if you have a recommender who's going to be talking about the science fair that you participated in, we want to ensure that your personal statement or a supplement or a short answer doesn't talk about the science fair, because then it becomes redundant for the reader. And if you remember back to the visual that we saw at the beginning of the stacks of applications, it will be very easy for an admissions committee officer to effectively just skim and move your stack on your application to a different pile because it wasn't kind of compelling or exciting for them. So, if you have a table like this, hopefully it helps you map out where you have a recommender talking about a particular activity, and then where you may want to spend time in a supplement talking about a different activity or a different experience, so that you don't overlap. So in the example here, you have that first university, which doesn't have any supplements. So they'll get a recommendation letter about the student's academic research, and then they'll get the Common App essay, which is talking a bit more about a particular activity that the student has had in their previous years. For the more selective school, which is University 7 here, they'll get the same recommendation letter, they'll get the same Common App, but then there's a couple of other supplements and short answer questions that they will then have the opportunity to share a few different parts of their background and sort of who they are as a person. So if you don't use this exact framework, that's perfectly okay, but using something similar to this will help you ensure that you're not being repetitive in your application. All right, so we'll switch now to talking a little bit about COVID-19 and the impact that this situation is having on the current college application process. But before I do that, Rahina, any thoughts or questions that have come through the chat box that we want to quickly address?
Yeah, I think one question, if we could just go back to the list of prompts.
Yeah.
So we have a question on the last prompt, share an essay on any topic of your choice.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, how would you go about answering a prompt where you can create your own prompt? And we can kind of cover this more in the Q&A as well, but we were just thinking, since we just went over the prompts, this might be good to talk about.
Yeah, so very similar to the advice, with the other 6 prompts. First, start with your story. Make sure you have a handle of what it is that you want to articulate or how you want to frame an experience or an activity that you participated in. And then, it's the prompt is sort of the ribbon on the present or the package, right? Whether you frame it as a challenge or as something interesting that you did, or how you spent your summer, whatever you decide to kind of be that kind of context or sort of the framing of your story is then perfectly okay, because prompt 7 is really giving you license to take this in any direction that you'd like.
Great. And I think we'll go ahead and answer the other questions towards the end of the webinar,
Okay.
since we're running a little short on time.
Sure. Yeah, I see that we're at the hour. We'll probably take another 15, 20 minutes or so if that's okay.
Sounds good. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So if we think about the current situation and the kind of the college application process this year, in some ways it won't be different from previous years, but in other ways it could be. So I'm sharing with you here sort of a map of the United States. And what you see is sort of different temperatures across the country, different data points depending on the cities that are being shown here. But sort of collectively, you get a sense of the weather that is kind of being experienced across the United States. Very similar to this, your college application has a number of different data points, whether it's your transcripts, your short answers, your activities and extracurricular list that you included, your recommendation, your Common App essay, or personal statement. There are a number of components that will make up your application, and collectively, this sort of weather map, or the kind of the 1 or 2 sentence narrative, will help provide sort of a view of who you are as a person. Now, in the current situation, some of you were in a situation where your SAT or ACT tests this past spring were canceled. You may sort of have been rescheduled for the fall. It's clear what will happen in the fall, if those tests will be available or not. And so you realize that a number of the data points that were originally going to be part of your application might not be. And so the reason why we're bringing that up is because then the parts of your application that will be there, specifically your essay, will be very, very critical for you to spend the time and to sort of commit to ensuring that you've got the right story that you want to tell. And so that's sort of a basic thought, is that you'll be submitting applications to schools that previously used the ACT or the SAT or the AP exam score to be able to kind of filter out certain students in order to determine kind of caliber and quality. And in many cases now, those schools will not have that option. So they'll be leaning more heavily onto your transcripts, onto your essays and your recommendation letters. And so you have a tremendous opportunity to be able to influence those decisions and those outcomes based on your essays in particular, for sure. You might be thinking, well, I got to take my ACT or my SAT. I'm very satisfied with my score. And so, I'm very confident as to how I'm going to go about this application process. And that's really fantastic to hear. But realize that you are now going against or going up against other applicants who will not have an SAT or an ACT. So if they have sort of devoted an extraordinary amount of time in building out their essays, both their Common App essay as well as their supplements, then you could be sort of in a vulnerable position where you may sort of be leaning more on your quantitative components, but realize that your essays are equally important, if not more, because you've got a hedge against the students who are coming in without those quantitative components in their application. So that's the first thought as to how this particular cycle of the college application process might change. The second thought is, if you are considering the Common App, there is a new optional essay that's been added to the Common App. It is 250 words. It's optional, as I said, so you don't have to complete it, so don't feel obligated to complete it. But it's an opportunity for you to explain anything that you have experienced or that has happened to you as a result of the current pandemic. So if by having to take classes online instead of being in person has really affected the way you have been able to thrive academically, maybe you're in a situation where a family member has lost their job, or somebody is dealing with an infection of coronavirus, and you're having to sort of help provide support. Maybe because you're now at home, you're having to share more of the responsibilities of taking care of a younger sibling. You might be in a situation where you don't have reliable Wi-Fi access, and so you are unable to sort of engage thoroughly into your academic experience. And so whatever it is that you may have endured as a result of schools closing and sort of all of us sheltering in place, this is the opportunity for you to share that with the admissions committee. You don't have to be very creative in how you write this. It doesn't have to be sort of in that sort of flowery language, but you can be very direct. You can sort of say, hey, this is what happened. These are the circumstances that I'm operating. This is what I'm trying to do or what I was unable to do, and I hope that that's taken into consideration. If there's anything that has affected the masses, right? So the ACT or SAT being canceled as an example, the admissions committee will already have that information. And so you don't have to devote the time here to talk about that. So this is really space for you to talk about anything where you have personally been impacted. And when I say personally impacted, again, it's not just that a family member has been affected in a certain way, but what has that done to you and to your particular situation? So be very, very specific about the impact that this particular sort of climate has had on you as an individual, and then sort of obviously on you as a college applicant. So I won't read the prompt here. It is on the Common App website, but again, it's an opportunity for you to talk about any challenges. If there's anything that you've done which has been really positive, so let's say you've done some extraordinary community service activities during this time, or you launched a website or anything like that, which is a bit more positive, you can look to other parts of your application maybe to capture those thoughts or those experiences if you choose to. But it seems based on the prompt, and I'm reading between the lines a little bit, but it seems based on the prompt that this is really space for you to talk about anything that you anywhere or anyhow that you've been adversely impacted. So let's talk about just some general guidelines or best practices when it comes to your essays that you'll be submitting with your college application. The first one is that you want to keep the focus on you. And this can be very difficult to do at times, especially if you're writing an essay about an uncle who has really inspired you to pursue a certain activity or a certain major. You may feel like you need to spend time to explain why that uncle is so amazing. Sometimes we see essays where somebody is part of Student Monthly or has done Camp Mosaic, and they spend a lot of time explaining what Camp Mosaic is and how it's part of the Ismaili Muslim community. We often see individuals who are AKF volunteers as part of their essays talking about what AKDN is and who Hajr Imam is, and realize that your uncle is not applying to college, Hajr Imam is not applying to college. This essay is really about you, so we want to ensure that you keep the focus on you. If you do need to sort of set up a scenario or sort of explain something that is unrelated to you, that's perfectly okay. Just take a couple of sentences to do that versus taking a paragraph or two, because that will take away the opportunity for you to be able to sort of, talk about who you are. So how do you ensure that the story and the focus stays on you? Again, talk about, how you were sort of transformed from that particular experience that you're discussing in your essay. Really think about maybe what you learned or how you grew, how you changed as a person. And to be honest, if you didn't learn and didn't grow, that's okay too, right? You shouldn't feel that every experience or every activity that you had has resulted in some profound level of responsibility and maturity. I could also write the essay where I spent 60 hours doing community service last summer, but I was frustrated at the end of that 60 hours because I didn't feel like I changed as a person. That honesty and that transparency is also just as interesting and as important as the person who has had a profound experience. The second sort of piece of advice or best practice is to really kind of work and rework your drafts. Very few, if not, I should say, no one that we know has gotten into a highly selective college or university with a first or second or third draft even. So if you're getting to version 10, version 15, version 30, that's okay, and that's probably normal. And so, you think about, we've also kind of seen the scenario where somebody's written a second draft, made a couple edits, and then they ask for our support because they want to sort of reduce the word count. They feel like they're already over the 650 limit, and so they need help kind of reducing word count. And our suggestion back to them is write as much as you can, as much as you need to explain the story that you want to tell, because it's very easy at the end to trim the word count and to get your story to a more succinct sort of narrative. But what you want to spend time doing at the beginning is to just write as much as you can and to sort of have all your ideas pour into that essay and onto that paper. So you've captured everything, at least as part of that first go around. And then, ask for feedback, right? So first and foremost, when you have a draft, read that draft aloud to yourself. It's very interesting how easily you can catch grammatical issues, sentence flow issues, sort of idea issues, right? So just reading a draft aloud to yourself will be helpful, at least to kind of catch some of the more simple or basic mistakes that you may have made. Engage teachers, right? And teachers are great resources. They oftentimes want to help. Realize though that teachers don't have the lens of an admissions committee officer. And so when they're giving you feedback, it may be more grammatical, it may be more structural, it may not be how you are sort of able to persuade the admissions committee member, right? So take their feedback with a grain of salt. If you're part of the Apollo 12 program, you also have access to an advisor, and so use that advisor and lean on them and sort of gather their feedback because they've gone through a very similar experience to what you're going through now. And again, when we think about sort of the number of drafts that you might go through, really sort of pushing yourself to understand whether the story that you're telling is unique, whether you're demonstrating sort of maturity and kind of increasing leadership over time, whether you're showing some sort of a story where you're talking about grit and resilience in the face of adversity, kind of some of those things, and pushing yourself to think along those lines will get you to kind of a fourth and fifth and sixth version of your essay. And if you think about the questions that are at the bottom left and the bottom right, these are really stemming from those three key questions, right? The idea of the impact that you had, what you learned from the experience, and what you took away or how you changed as a person. Those are all kind of capturing some of these thoughts or these ideas that we've listed out here at the bottom. So if you use that approach, either the kind of the process map or the key questions, inshallah, you'll get to some of the kind of the points that we hope that you'll make as part of your essays. All right, quickly, we'll share with you kind of a proposed timeline that you may consider as part of this process. For those of you who already have an essay draft, that's a great thing. Hopefully you've taken away some thoughts and ideas from this session that you can then go back and make some adjustments. And even if you need to start from scratch, that's perfectly all right as well, and hopefully you're comfortable with that. For those of you who are applying early, either early action or early decision, the hope is that you've got at least a working draft in the next week or two, because those schools to which you might be applying early will very likely have some supplemental essays that will be required of you. And so you want to be able to kind of get through your personal statement or your Common App essay so that you can then switch and start to think about the topics that you might cover as part of your supplemental essays. Obviously, school is going to be starting here in a couple of weeks, so you want to sort of be able to do the legwork now so that when fall semester, senior year commences, that you aren't feeling kind of behind or overwhelmed. But then you can use that time, you can use the first few weeks of the fall semester to kind of work and rework your drafts, gather feedback, and then hopefully submit your early applications by sort of November, late November timeframe. And every school has a different deadline, so you want to check the schools that you're applying to early to ensure that you're not going to miss that deadline. Another quick thought to just highlight here, oftentimes we hear students say that I need to apply early because my chances of getting accepted are higher if I were to submit an application early. And there isn't any scientific proof that applying early will result in a more likely acceptance. The idea that the students who are applying early get accepted at a higher rate is because those students have spent an extraordinary amount of time researching the schools to which they're applying early. They have really appreciated the differences and the nuances of those schools and really understand how they're going to benefit from that environment and how the school will benefit from the experiences that that student is bringing. And so, you might see that the acceptance rates are higher during an early round, but it's really because the students who are applying early are so convinced and have really spent the time and actually then reflect that that set of insights in their supplemental essays to be able to convince the admissions committee. So just keep that in mind. So if you are submitting an application early, do so because you have an application that is sound, that is strong, and that is your best piece of work that you will be able to submit to that particular school. Generally speaking, it's a good practice to at least get 1 or 2 or 3 applications out early so that it'll kind of lessen the load when it comes to the regular decision, but it's ultimately up to you and your family as to how you might pace yourself through this process. Then when it comes to the regular decision timelines, you've got maybe a couple of extra weeks, but not that much because the bulk of schools will then fall, the bulk of the remaining schools will fall into the regular timeline. And so you'll want to ensure that if there are any adjustments you want to make to your personal statement that you get, the Common App actually gives you the option to upload multiple Common App essays going to different schools. So you can maybe even take advantage of that option. And then you'll have a number of supplements for different schools that you may be applying to that you'll need to kind of work through. The suggestion that we'll make here is, again, because of the current dynamic and the current situation that we're in with COVID-19, that we encourage you to try to submit or at least have your application and your application completed by December 1. Now, this is a bit of an artificial deadline, but the reason being is if you remember back to module 3 or 4, when we talked about building your list of schools, the one piece of advice that we had is that if you're thinking about applying to 4 schools, apply to 6. If you're thinking about applying to 8 schools, maybe consider applying to 12, right? Whatever number of schools you were originally targeting, see if you can add a few more to that. Because the level of uncertainty and the level of complexity that will be part of this application cycle is unlike ones that we've seen from previous cycles. And with students not having ACT or SAT scores, with schools becoming test optional, there's just so many more variables in this current situation now than there were before. So if you're always just considering applying to 6 schools, and that's the path you follow, we kind of hope and pray that things work out for you. But if you want to hedge your bets, if you want to hedge the risks, and you want to cast a wide net as wide as you can, we encourage you to think about maybe an internal deadline of December 1st so that you have that last month of the calendar year to maybe crank out a few more applications, a few more essays, a few more supplements that you can then sort of submit before the deadline. And then we'll talk about recommendation letters as part of the next module, but the idea is that sort of mid-August, hopefully you've got a recommendation letter strategy, you engage the recommenders that you are targeting, and then you spend the fall just kind of checking in with them and following up with them so that they don't kind of miss their deadline and put your application in jeopardy. Rahina, anything to add from your standpoint?
No, not right now.
Okay. All right, so we know that there are a number of parents and guardians that are on the webinar here as well. So we'll just share a couple of thoughts for all of you, just so that you can think about your role as part of this process. First and foremost, essay writing and this particular part of the application is quite daunting for students. It's something that's kind of very frustrating. It's anxiety ridden. It's really demanding and sort of something that students will devote a large part of their mind share to, and you may not always see that. So you may see your child, walking around the home aimlessly, or sort of kind of unclear of how they might approach this, and that's okay. All we ask is that you give them space, you give them the support that they might need to brainstorm and kind of to go through this process, so that they can come through on the other side. In addition to that, one of the best practices that we've heard from other families is that families set up what we refer to as kind of a weekly check-in or a bi-weekly check-in, where you have a touch point with your student, and you can talk to your student about anything related to the college application process or kind of the college planning process. The reason for scheduling this and having it sort of at a designated time is so that it doesn't just bleed into the rest of the week, and it doesn't sort of induce more frustration and more kind of stress and uncertainty for the student as well as for you. So that would be kind of one additional recommendation that we have, is if you have a weekly family meeting or a weekly family check-in, maybe designate some time so that you can talk about all things related to college, and cover all of the questions that you might have, or all of the ways that your student is seeking support from you. In addition to that, as parents, we encourage you to reach out to other parents, those who may have already gone through this process in previous years, or those who are going through this process now. Talk to them about what's working for them, things that they're concerned about, things that they have sort of instituted as a family that you might consider doing for yourselves as well. The Apollo 12 program has a parent channel on Slack. So if you haven't yet engaged there, share some tips, best practices, pose your questions to that community, because it's another way for you to gather some insights and some perspectives to support your child. And then lastly, hopefully at this point your student has a pretty healthy list of schools to which they will be applying, and so spend the time now to research those schools yourselves. Go to the schools' websites, understand what those schools have to offer, understand what makes those schools different or unique, so that once, inshallah, those acceptances start coming in the spring, you have a far more intimate view of the school that you and your family will be deciding upon. All right, so a lot of things that we've covered here today. Hopefully, depending on where you are, regardless of where you are in this process, hopefully you've taken away a couple of tidbits or a couple of thoughts. We've got a few next steps here, and then we'll open it up to questions that you might have. For this particular module, there will be a short survey that is displayed once we conclude here. It'll take about 2 or 3 minutes for you to fill out, but it'll be a good way for us to make sure that we are addressing your concerns and your needs as we plan out the remaining modules of this program. In terms of critical next steps, think about the approach you want to take to build your profile or your narrative. We talked about the mind mapping and the example that we saw with Ziana, the 3 key questions and the example we saw with Yusuf. You could even take both approaches, right? It's perfectly fine to use both approaches and see which ones may lead you to certain ideas or allow you to flesh out your thinking in different ways. So completely okay to use both approaches if you decide to. And then if you have a working draft that you've already started prior to this session, go back, revisit it, see what you can do, how you can enhance it, how you can adjust it based on some of the things that we've discussed here. You also want to think about a timeline that will work for you. We proposed one that would be suitable if you're applying early or regular, but think about what are some of the key milestones that you want to schedule for yourselves, and then ensure that you're driving towards those. Additionally, if you've been impacted in some way by COVID-19, think about whether you need an essay to be able to explain or sort of reason with the admissions committee as to how your circumstances have changed. Continue researching the schools that are on your list. As we get into the next module on supplemental essays, you'll see that you'll have to really elaborate quite a bit on why a particular school is of interest to you and what you will do and how you will contribute to that community. And so continue to research the schools that are on your list so that you have a very intimate sense of why those schools are of higher preference for you. And then, as we just mentioned, try to schedule a regular check-in with your family so that you can cover all things related to college and college planning, and so that hopefully will help manage some of the stress or uncertainty that this process might be giving you. Rahina, I'll hand it over to you to talk about some of the logistics and other next steps.
Great, thank you, Rahim. So thank you all for joining us for this webinar, and thank you to our amazing presenter, Rahim. So Module 6 will be on the topic of supplemental essays. So those are the essays that usually colleges might require you to answer specific essays, usually between like 1 to 5. And those are specific to their school. And this module will also cover recommendation letters, so asking teachers, mentors, other individuals in your life for recommendation letters for your college application. So this module will be held on August 12th at 8 p.m. Central Time, and the URL to register is right here on the screen, and will also be put on the chat. And if you have not joined Apollo 12 and would like access to this webinar recording and other resources, please join at this tiny URL that's on the presentation. You will be matched to an advisor and get help on your college application, including your essays and personal statements. And it'll be just really beneficial to both have that community and have both mentorship and guidance and access future webinars as well. So if you haven't signed up, we would strongly encourage you to go ahead and do that as well. And with that, we'll go ahead and move into the Q&A section. So for the questions that weren't addressed via text, one of our first questions is on what sort of resources are out there to have our essays reviewed by other individuals. And I kind of just wanted to answer this really quick and give everyone a heads up. If you may not have seen it, but in the Slack, Apollo 12, we're offering Master Advisor office hours for framing your personal statement this month, and office advisors for revising your essays, and that will be starting next month. So these will both be kind of office hour sessions where you can drop in, ask questions about your essay, get some feedback, and some advice on both of these topics. And there's information about that in the Slack page. You can also talk with your one-on-one advisors on specific questions you have on your essay, or if you're looking for feedback. And I would also strongly emphasize just looking for mentors and teachers that you trust and other individuals in your life that you would be comfortable talking through and brainstorming through your essay, or thinking about certain characteristics you could highlight, and then also having them provide feedback on your essays if you're comfortable with that. Yeah, Rahim, if you have anything to add on that, otherwise I can jump into the Q&A.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Great. So the first question we have is more of a semantic question, but would it be okay for us to talk in third person in our essay, and how would you encourage the use of imagery and quotes in our essay?
Do you want to take a crack at that? You want me to go first?
I think I can answer a little bit of this. So sure. I would say it's really up to your discretion. I would encourage actually the use of imagery. I think for me, when I was going through the college application process, I was very much like focused on from the different like types of structures that Rahim provided during the presentation. I was focused on the zoom in, zoom out, and the reflection kind of styles of essays. And I would say that painting a picture for your reader is very valuable and very helpful to sort of give them a better idea of who you are as a person, how would you be as a roommate, how would you contribute to campus life, and also just get to know you more holistically. And I think that can be done really well through a story and through imagery. So I would definitely encourage that, including the use of quotes, whether that's like illustrating examples or quoting someone who's maybe very, very impactful in your life. I would just, yeah, just use those to your discretion, not like overuse or not over tend to overuse those, but like, yeah, just where you see them as appropriate, I would say.
Yeah, those are great. I'll just even add to that. There's some schools that are experimenting now with video essays. So you could submit a clip of a few minutes talking about a part of your background or an experience. So the prompts, would be very similar, but you have an opportunity to actually add your voice literally, as well as your kind of visual, to a submission. It's sort of more experimentation that some of the schools are taking at this time. Other schools, while they require the essay as well as the supplements, they may allow you to submit, again, kind of a video clip, right, in lieu of maybe an in-person interview. So we are sort of seeing some different dimensions or kind of forms of media come into the mix now, which is interesting. The thought is, though, in any case, right, whether it's a written form or sort of video form, the idea is that you still want to ensure that you are kind of articulating your story and your narrative in a very meaningful way, that you're structuring your thoughts, you're able to kind of get to the depths of why those experiences were so meaningful for you, and then kind of how your journey has been sort of influenced as a result of that, right? And kind of what your trajectory looks like also as a result of that. So while you may think about third person or kind of video or sort of other media, these are all ways that the schools are experimenting and sort of ways that you can experiment as well. Write a draft in third person, have a couple people read it, and if it doesn't jive, if it doesn't resonate with your readers, then you can always go back and kind of make some adjustments as needed. But this is sort of why we talk about kind of working and reworking your drafts, right? Again, we don't really know anybody who got accepted into a selective school using a first or second draft. So you just feel comfortable knowing that you'll be spending many weeks writing drafts of essays, and through that, hopefully what you ultimately submit is something that you're very, very proud of.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And it's really interesting to hear that the video essay is also an option at some colleges. I would say that if you are comfortable with that, definitely try and take advantage. I think it's a way for college admissions officers to gain more insight to who you are as a person and see the person talking as well. So that's really cool. They didn't have that when I applied to college. Great. So another question that we have is any tips on being concise in our essays, and how much is the word count limit for Common App essays?
Yeah, it's a good question. Kind of, and it depends on where you are in the process. I would say if you're early in the process, if you're starting with the first or second draft, your goal is just to get all your ideas on paper, I think, because it's easier to start with more and to whittle it down than the other way, right? So kind of in the early stages, really kind of elaborate your draft might even look more like an outline with a lot of bullets and sub bullets and sub bullets, and that's okay too. Over time, you'll kind of shape those into sentences and paragraphs. If you are sort of later in the process, and you're kind of doing more of the touch ups and polish, then kind of the word count becomes more important. And it's not that if you are at 651 words for the Common App versus 650, which is the limit, that it's going to be some kind of a transgression, right? The idea is that you're given a space to be able to articulate your thoughts. If you obviously do it in 300 words, then it might invite questions of whether you've really kind of reflected and you've kind of gone to the depths that are going to be important for this exercise. But if you get close to 650, and if it's a matter of just trimming 10 or 20 words, that's something that's manageable to do later. But I wouldn't worry about kind of word count too much at this point.
Great, thank you. And one of our last questions is, should our personal statement be about our extracurriculars or achievements? What are some other ways of brainstorming things outside of that? And I think I can kind of take a stab at this if that's fine
Yeah,
with you, Raheem, and then you
of
can
course.
expand. So I would say like just refer back to the mind map technique and the 3 questions technique that Raheem spoke about, and see if you can use those in combination. Um, I would say on the mind map perspective, especially, I think something that I did personally was I sort of made a mind map like that when I applied to college, but I also like wrote down just some like pivotal life experiences that I feel like really shaped me as a person, especially as I was growing up. And then I also just thought about these childhood stories that kind of shaped my perspective or way of thinking of life, whether that was with my family or with friends or like a personal experience I had. So I would encourage you to just continue to sort of reflect, talk to the people who are close to you and know you best, including your family and friends and maybe teachers and mentors, and kind of ask like, hey, what do you think are some like key characteristics about me? Like what, like how would you introduce me to a person, for example? And I think those can also kind of give you a leeway into understanding, okay, like these are some characteristics that other people see in me. What are the characteristics that I see in me, and what are the experiences that come with those? Um, what are the experiences that were pivotal or impactful for me throughout my life? And I think those are great ways of starting an essay and expanding on that. I know that for me, I like kind of took a childhood experience at the beginning of my experience at the beginning of my essay, and then I expanded it more broadly to talk about the lessons that I learned from that, and also just yeah, I zoomed out to give more of a perspective on what my life was looking like at the time. So that's just my tidbits. Hobbies, activities. It doesn't only have to be extracurricular activities. It can be family responsibilities, like Raheem mentioned as well.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, I think that's great advice. I think the activities we're sort of using almost as anchor points, right? So even in the example of Ziana, a lot of the themes of who she is really were sort of the result of some of the activities that she participated in. Now, Ziana may not write an essay about babysitting. She might write an essay about her walk to her babysitting job, right? And some of the things that she is preparing in her mind to engage those children, to be able to sort of stimulate them, to support them with their homework, whatever it might be. So the activities could be the central point of your essay, but they could also just be anchor points that you can then use to really sort of tell your story. We've even seen examples of essays written by some of our Smiley students who participated in global encounters, and you might say, "Oh, perfect! That's like a great topic to cover through one's Common App essay." But instead of the actual global encounter experience, they talked about the flight to global encounters and kind of the jarring experience of flying alone for the first time and what that was like for them for the 15 hours that they were on that flight, right? So completely independent of everything that they may have taken away from that particular experience, but really just giving you a view into that person's mind and into that person's sort of perspective on the world, right? And how they are sort of seeing themselves. We've seen essays, individuals who are applying henna to some of the Jamati members during a Kushali celebration. And, it's not an extracurricular. It's something that they just did that one evening. But during that sort of essay, we got to get into the mind of that individual and got to sort of really analyze the world through that lens. So the activities are a good way. We saw the example of the student who had an internship at a construction firm. If that's the approach you want to take and you want to talk about your activity itself and some of the things that you learned, that's perfectly fine. But you can also take almost a splinter sort of activity or experience from your anchor and kind of really delve into that and sort of have that as being sort of the narrative that you share.
Yeah, definitely. So the last question that we're going to end with tonight, and then we please request if you are able to, please take the survey after the webinar has ended. It's only a 5-question survey. Um, so before we close out, our last question is, should our essay show more about our personality or what we've accomplished during high school?
Yeah, do you want to take a try?
Yeah, I would say I would again give yourself that discretion. It could do it. Your essay could talk about both. It could talk about One of those, I think, the construction internship, like engineering internship example that Raheem mentioned, could possibly lean more on like what is something that you have accomplished and how can I talk about this in a structured way. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that. It can be a blend of both. Because your personality can be showcased through the activities that you participate in, through your childhood and adolescent experiences that you talk about, through that time that you were on the Global Encounter flight and were alone and what that experience was like. Like your essay, one of the main purposes is for yourself and your personality, um, and that can include the things that you've accomplished, but really like who are you as a person? How does that shine through the essay? And of course, it doesn't have to tackle everything about you as a person, right? We're all very nuanced, complex beings. There's no way that we could fit our lifetime sort of experiences into one or two or three essays. Um, so I would leave that to your discretion. I would leave that to you to do brainstorming on both of these aspects and see what makes for a better and more impactful and more truthful to yourself type of story.
Yeah, and even if we just think about the approaches that we've discussed, what are some of the key themes of who you are as a person, right? What's that one or two sentence summary? You can talk about an accomplishment, but what does that get you to, right? How did
Mhm.
you kind of go about achieving that outcome? What were some of the things that you had to endure, or some of the investments you had to make of time or of effort? All of those things become equally important. So it's not just that I held a fundraiser at my school and this is how much money we raised and that was a big accomplishment. It's what are some of the steps that got you through that journey to get you to that outcome. While the outcome is exciting, the kind of the journey itself is equally sort of enthralling for the reader, or can be enthralling for the reader, right? So spending the time to delve into those dimensions, to talk about some of those pieces, will still not take away from the overall accomplishment, but it'll give far more insight to the reader. And then if you think about your application in total, between your recommendation letters, your essays, your short answers, whatever else is going into your application, what is the kind of collective impression that you are leaving behind? Because the
Mhm.
accomplishment is really just one part of who you are, right? And to Rahina's point, there's no way you can summarize 18 or 19 years of a lifespan in a set of 10 pages. So, if you think about your application in its entirety, what are the things that you want to leave with the admissions committee member? And that would be sort of, what we would encourage you to focus on, sort of what is that narrative that then that committee member is going to go and sort of advocate for when they're having those discussions about who they accept and who they decline.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Raheem. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us via Slack or akb@theasmileyusa.org. But yes, please register for our next session, and sign up for Apollo 12 if you haven't. And in the chat, we have a lot of resources, including the Master Advisor office hours if you need help with framing your personal statement and eventually revising your essays. Apollo 12 will be offering that, and more information about that is in the Slack. And then we've also linked an extracurricular activity spreadsheet from Module 4, which was on the topic of articulating your extracurricular activities. And you can make a copy of this, and hopefully that'll be helpful in your reflection and organization of your essay and thinking about topics. And yeah, and please wash your hands, practice good physical and social distancing, and stay safe and well. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us. But I want to thank Raheem. Thank you so much for your time and for such a wonderful and really insightful presentation. And yeah, stay safe, everyone. Take care and yelling with us. And we have our survey at the end of the presentation as well.
To
Yelling with us.
everyone.
Thank you.